Hello and welcome to video number 22 in the Lessons in Logic playlist. And we now want to practice putting categorical syllogisms into standard form. We've already had a video number 15, I see, on putting categorical propositions into standard form. Well, that's the first step, but you have to put the categorical syllogism into standard form first. All right, so why do we need to translate categorical syllogisms into standard form? Just because arguments in everyday language aren't well crafted, which means they aren't orderly in such a way as to make it clear what are the major logical features of the argument. Now, I don't think that was my observation. I think I read that in a textbook and recycled it for you. Not a direct quote, but a fairly close paraphrase, I think. Anyway, in order to analyze arguments, you have to get them into a standard form. I could say more about this, but then this video would get too long with me rambling. I do that too much. Let's leave it at that. I probably said a lot more back in video 15. Now, what are some ways a categorical syllogism can fail to be in standard form? Maybe the most obvious, we might not have the syllogisms in the proper order. For example, this is the normal way of presenting what we call a Barbara syllogism, which is an AAA syllogism in figure 1. All cows are mammals, all mammals are animals, so all cows are mammals. All cows are mammals, all mammals are animals, so all cows are animals. You want to make the argument flow naturally from the S term to the M term to the P term, and then close it up by saying, therefore, we made the connection from the S to the P term. That's the normal way of talking, but unfortunately, it doesn't fit our criteria for standard form. You have to get the propositions into the right order. Now, why is it that our propositions have to be in an unnatural order? Why do we have to put our arguments into an order that doesn't match the way people normally talk, the straightforward way of thinking, from cows to mammals to animals? Why instead would we have to go from mammals to animals and then jump back to cows and then go from cows to mammals? Well, because that's just the way it is. Because you have to put syllogisms into into a standard form with pretty narrow parameters. And if you don't, you just won't be able to apply the same methods of testing an argument for validity. So I didn't want to talk about this in any kind of detail. I know I've talked about it in earlier videos, and I've started to talk about it in detail. You have to do, putting arguments into standard form is all about this. It's about doing a little more work up front, making the arguments fit into some pretty narrowly defined structures, shapes, patterns, fit into some very narrow patterns. You have to do some work up front, putting arguments into a structure or shape or pattern that's got some pretty narrow criteria. I like that phrasing. Put arguments into a structure that fits a very narrow set of criteria. And that will allow us to use a smaller number of methods with fewer steps, testing arguments for validity. Because all we have to do is look at the smaller number of possible patterns that fit those criteria. All right, if that wasn't clear, and if you care, go back and find it in earlier videos. Probably video 15 is a good place to start. Anyway, categorical syllogisms need to be put into standard form if we are going to apply to them our methods of testing arguments for validity, which involves a little bit of work up front, but pays off a whole lot of work saved later in having a smaller number of methods of testing arguments for validity that are easier to apply. Now, this syllogism, to get back to the example, is not in standard form. The premises are out of order. Here's how we can put it in standard form. And when it's in standard form, you have 3 distinct categorical propositions. The conclusion is written last. The first term of the conclusion, being the minor term, which we normally symbolize with S, occurs in the second premise, being the minor premise. The minor premise being the one that has the minor term. The major premise occurs first. The major premise is the one with the major term. The major term is the second term of the conclusion. And then the middle term occurs once in each premise. All right, so now this one's in standard form. You have to get them in the right order. What else? Categorical syllogism might contain more than 3 terms, even if it only concerns 3 categories. I think I'll just leave that there because I think we're likely to get back to it in a moment. The propositions out of which the syllogism is constructed may themselves not be standard form categorical propositions. Once again, for this one, just go back to video number 15. Now, what are some available strategies for translating a categorical proposition into standard form? Eliminate synonyms. Let me see if I can give you a good example. What luck, I already have one typed. Some presidents are politicians. All politicians are people who tell lies, and therefore some presidents are liars. You can put that into standard form by eliminating the syllogisms, the synonyms. Don't eliminate any syllogisms at this point. Eliminate the synonyms. Eliminate one synonym. We have people who tell lies, and we have liars. So take one out and replace it with the other. Some presidents are politicians. All politicians are people who tell lies, and therefore some presidents are people who tell lies. Will work. It's a little bulky. It's a little better to say some presidents are politicians. All politicians are liars, and therefore some presidents are liars. Now we have our S term presidents, our P term liars, and our M term politicians, which I'm respectively putting in underlining, bolding, and italics. And we only have those 3 terms. Now, this is still not in standard form. Shall we go ahead and put it in standard form, putting it in the right order? Yes, we shall. Now, what I've just done is I've rearranged the propositions so they're all in their own individual sentences. That is also necessary for putting it in standard form. Have I said that yet? I don't think I've said that. Well, unfortunately, I think it would go in the last video. In order to put categorical syllogisms into standard form, each proposition should be its own individual sentence. Well, I think that was implied by putting categorical propositions into standard form. Yeah, it was implied. It was implied. I've said plenty about putting categorical propositions into standard form, and it does involve 1 proposition per sentence. And I've said that categorical syllogisms cannot be in standard form unless their constituent categorical propositions are in standard form. Therefore, I have already said that categorical syllogisms, in order to be in standard form, must have 1 categorical proposition per sentence. There's a syllogism about me talking about syllogisms. But back to this particular argument. Some presidents are politicians. All politicians are people who tell lies, and therefore some presidents are liars is not in standard form. A first step to getting it in standard form is to eliminate the synonyms. Some presidents are politicians. All politicians are liars, and therefore some presidents are liars. But I don't think we have it in standard form yet. The S term, the minor term, is the one that occurs first in the conclusion, and that would be presidents. So we want that in our second premise. So once I Control X and Control V this proposition, now I should have it in standard form. All politicians are liars, major premise. All politicians are liars, major premise. Some presidents are politicians, minor premise, therefore some presidents are liars. Now it's in standard form. Another useful strategy is to remove term complements. This is often easy to do if you know how to use obversion, conversion, and contraposition. For example, if you have an obnoxious term complement as the predicate of a categorical proposition, obversion can get rid of it for you. And that means change the quality of the proposition, i.e. make it negative if it's positive and make it positive if it's negative. Switch an E to an A and vice versa, or an O to an I and vice versa, while also replacing the predicate term with its term complement. In other words, all dogs are non-cats means the same thing as no dogs or cats. And this strategy will occasionally allow you to eliminate an obnoxious synonym. Let me see if I can expand this. Let's say we had this argument. All dogs are non-cats, and all cats are jerks, and therefore their dogs are jerks. Cat lovers, I'm not endorsing the truth of every premise here. I certainly endorse that all dogs are non-cats. Now, this is not in standard form. Let's put it into standard form. First, let's get rid of that term complement. All You know what? First, I'm just going to type the premises. I'm going to type the propositions by themselves. Now, I want to make sure it's in standard form. I want to make sure the ordering of the propositions is right. I'm going to do that next. It turns out it's easy. You only need a moment to observe the minor term, the first one in the conclusion, and that means the premise with that term that's first in the conclusion should be the second premise. The second term in the conclusion, the last term in the entire argument, should occur in the first premise. Also, no issues there. Dogs and jerks are not used synonymously. But now we have these two statements, all cats are jerks, all dogs are non-cats. So we don't have just one middle term. So we have to replace one of those terms with its term complement, so we have one middle term. Here's a terrible way to do it. You're going to use obversion. You could try using obversion on the first premise. No cats are non-jerks means the same thing as all cats are jerks. Bad approach. Now we have 5 terms instead of just 4. So that's the wrong fix. Let's do obversion on the minor premise. All dogs are non-cats becomes no dogs are cats. And now our argument is in standard form. All cats are jerks, no dogs are cats, therefore no dogs are jerks. Now you might be thinking, this isn't a valid argument. Those premises don't even guarantee their conclusion. Well, I think you're right, but let's not talk about why. That sort of thing will come up in the next video. Our next lesson does not concern strategies for translating categorical propositions into standard form. My apologies, that comes from some earlier arrangement of some of my notes. Here is something that's terribly important, though, and this is the single most important thing you can do for translating categorical propositions and categorical syllogisms into standard form. Use a scheme of abbreviation. And now the real reason to have this video, despite all the minutes I've spent talking so far, the real reason to have the video is just what I'm about to do. Let's do a scheme of abbreviation on these 3 arguments. Now, for translating categorical syllogisms into standard form, you're always going to have 3 terms to symbolize, and you're going to use the same 3 symbols, S, P, and M. S will always be the first term in the conclusion, P will always be the second term in the conclusion, M must always be the middle term, which is the one that occurs in both premises, or the one that's not the major or minor term, because there's only 3 terms in a categorical syllogism. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell anyone who cares, jot it down. I'm going to jot down what are the minor, major, and middle terms. And then I'm going to restate the argument using those symbols. So the argument we're going to practice with first is all pizzas are delicious. All delicious things are wonderful, so all pizzas are wonderful. I like that argument, although I probably don't agree with the first premise, but who cares? Which one is the conclusion? Well, the conclusion indicator so is a pretty dead giveaway. The conclusion is all pizzas are wonderful. Now, my brain is trying to jump ahead and say, oh, it's an A form categorical proposition for the conclusion. What about the premises? Are they A and A? Yes, they are. What's the figure? If it's the right figure, then this is a Barber syllogism. That's how we know it's valid, but we're not testing it for validity yet. We're putting it into standard form so we don't have any issues testing for validity later, and so we can avoid any mistakes. If I try to do that all in my head, I'm much more liable to make a mistake. Okay, all pizzas are wonderful is the conclusion. The first term in it is what? Pizzas. So S is pizzas, or minor term is pizzas. P is not wonderful. You have to make it a noun or noun phrase. Remember, all the terms are nouns or noun phrases. You have to change adjectives to nouns. That's something we'll go over in more detail back in video 15 on translating categorical propositions into standard form. So our minor term is pizzas, our major term is wonderful things, and our middle term, of course, then is delicious things. So our conclusion, let's take the conclusion first. All S are P. Now our premises, let's see, all pizzas are delicious. That's all S are M. And then all M are P. So here's the argument stated in standard form. S equals pizzas, M equals delicious things, and the argument is all M are P, all S are M, so all S are P. Now, if we were going all the way through, if we were testing the arguments for validity, once we put them into standard form, we would want to say whether they're valid, state whether the premises guarantee the conclusion after showing our work. Once you have it in standard form, you've probably done 60% of the job. The last, I don't know, 20%, and it's a big 20%, is to state whether the argument is valid. This one is indeed valid, but you also have to do roughly the remaining 30% of the work, and it's a big 30%, show that it's valid. And we don't know how to do that yet because that's coming up in future videos. I think we'll learn 3 methods. So let's leave this out. We're just putting it into standard form for now. Now let's see if we can go a little more quickly on the next ones. As usual, I'm not endorsing these arguments. I just find them slightly interesting. Let me first organize some text so that I can fill in an argument more quickly. All right, this is the pattern of what we're going to use. S equals something, P equals something, M equals something. Premise, premise, so conclusion. We'll use that pattern on both of our next 2 syllogisms. So here's our next syllogism. Star Trek is the best sci-fi. It's philosophy in space, and that makes it the best sci-fi. What's the conclusion here? Well, it's the one that's supported by the other 2 statements. Star Trek is the best sci-fi. Unfortunately, Star Trek is not plural. So I could say for the minor term, S symbolizes Star Treks. But I don't even know what Star Treks are in the plural. I think I have to use my old reliable strategy of just using the phrasing things that are. Things that are Star Trek, that's my minor term. Now, best sci-fi. Well, I can't just write the best sci-fi. That's not a plural noun or noun phrase. I have to use my tried and true strategy again. Things that are the best sci-fi. I guess you could say works of science fiction. That would be fine. I like my standard things that are. I'm going to use it. Now, philosophy in space. You can almost make that plural grammatically by saying philosophies in space, but that's totally something different. It doesn't refer to stories about philosophical stories in space, philosophical stories that take place in space. That's what we're getting at. I recommend, once again, make your terms plural, nouns or noun phrases, using the standard language, things that are, and then put in whatever you need to. Whenever there's the slightest bit of difficulty, this strategy will, I don't think it will ever let you down. I guess you could possibly do it wrongly, but it's very difficult to get this one wrong, or at least it's easier to get this one right than any other strategy I know for stating terms. All right, so the conclusion then is all things that are Star Trek are things that are the best sci-fi are using this scheme of abbreviation. S equals things that are Star Trek, P equals things that are the best sci-fi, M equals things that are philosophy in space, all S are P. That is our conclusion. And our premise, Star Trek is philosophy in space. That uses the S term. And the middle term, the minor term, the middle term, S and M, all things that are Star Trek are things that are philosophy in space. And then our other premise, that makes it the best sci-fi, is implicitly stating that all things that are philosophy in space are things that are the best sci-fi. So it turns out this one has the same pattern as the last one. It's another, as we call them, barbarous syllogism, but probably more on that in another video. All M are P, all S are M, so all S are P. That's the argument pattern. Now, finally, Star Wars is the best sci-fi because it has lightsabers. Movies with lightsabers are just the best. Well, I think I'm going to recommend another things that are formulation. Star Wars is the best sci-fi because it has lightsabers, and movies with lightsabers are just the best. So what's our conclusion? Our conclusion is Star Wars is the best sci-fi. this language, statement, because, statement, and statement, more or less guarantees, maybe there's some plausible grammatical exception, but it's pretty much guaranteed that a phrasing like this, statement because, statement, comma, and statement, means conclusion because premise and premise. So our conclusion is Star Wars is the best sci-fi. I'm going to go with the standard locution, things that are Star Wars. And I'm going to go with another standard locution, themes that are the best sci-fi. And so our conclusion, of course, is going to be all things that are Star Wars are things that are the best sci-fi. It's universal because it's talking about everything that's a Star Wars story. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. What's our middle term? It's things with lightsabers. Now, in one premise, we say has lightsabers, and another premise, we say movies with lightsabers. So here we have one of those synonyms situations. Do we say things that have lightsabers, or do we say movies with lightsabers? It's probably usually best to stick as close as possible to the language of the original argument, and we already have a very convenient noun or noun phrase with this phrase, movies with lightsabers. So that should do. Movies with lightsabers is our middle term. So Star Wars has lightsabers is our first stated premise. But not the premise we want to state first when we put it into standard form, because it's the minor premise. It contains the minor term, things that are Star Wars. Our major premise containing the major term will go first. And it is, in the original language, movies with lightsabers are just the best. So all movies with lightsabers are things that are the best sci-fi. And what do you know? We have another Barber syllogism. We have another AAA figure 1 syllogism. Anyway, those are some of the basics on how to put a categorical syllogism into standard form. And this is it. It's relatively simple. There's not much work to do. State what your symbols are, and then restate the argument using the symbols. And after that, you don't even have to look at the original argument when you test it for validity. But how do we test it for validity? Well, that will come up in the next few videos. See you then.